Have you ever just stopped and thought about, well, how you think? I mean, really thought about how you experience the world, moment to moment. Today, we're going to dive into a way of thinking that does exactly that. It's called phenomenology, and believe it or not, this powerful way of looking at our everyday lives can actually open a really profound door to faith. Okay, let's get into it.
So let's start with something super simple. Just picture a coffee mug on a table. When you look at it, what do you actually see? You don't see the back, right? Or the inside, or the bottom. You really just see one single side of it. And yet, you don't experience a flat picture, do you? You perceive the whole thing, the entire mug, as a single solid object. So how does your mind do that? How does your consciousness grasp a whole object that it can't possibly see all at once? Well, that simple question, that little bit of everyday magic, is exactly where phenomenology starts.
So how does this whole thing work? Well, the best way to think about phenomenology isn't as some stuffy, old philosophy, but more like a practical toolkit, a totally new way of thinking and seeing the world that's all around us.
You know, the goal here is actually refreshingly simple. Phenomenology is all about the practice of describing how things show up to us. It's not like writing in a diary about your feelings. No, this is a serious investigation into the very structures of consciousness that make meaning possible in the first place. To do this, it kind of has a few key rules. First, you always start with the experience itself, the actual seeing or hoping or remembering, not with some pre-cooked theory from physics or whatever. Second, you got to recognize that our consciousness is always aimed at something. And third, and this is a big one, you temporarily bracket your assumptions. You just set aside the whole question of, is this real, for a minute, so you can focus purely on the experience of it.
Okay, so we've got a method for looking at coffee mugs. That's cool. But why does this matter so much for religious thought, specifically for Catholic thinkers? I mean, how on earth does this build a bridge to faith?
So here's the absolute crucial point: non-reductionism. By taking our lived experience seriously, phenomenology refuses to just boil everything down to its basic parts. It says, hold on, an experience like love or guilt or even worship can't just be explained away as just a chemical reaction in your brain. No way. It has its own structure, its own meaning, and it deserves to be understood on its own terms.
And this really shows you the difference, right? A reductionist might say a person is just a biological machine, and love is just a chemical cocktail. But the phenomenological view, looking from the inside, sees a person as a center of real, lived experience. It protects the richness of human life from being oversimplified, and that creates a space where things like morality and spirituality can be taken seriously again.
So, how did this philosophical toolkit actually get used to build that bridge to faith? Well, we can see it clearly in the work of two giant thinkers from the 20th century who connected these ideas directly with Catholic thought. The founder, a guy named Edmund Husserl, laid all the groundwork in the early 1900s. Pretty soon after, his student Edith Stein used the method to understand other people. And then, decades later, Karol Wojtyla, who you probably know as Pope John Paul II, used it to build his entire moral vision.
Edith Stein's work on empathy was an absolute game changer. She argued that when we see another person, we don't just see a body and then, guess that there's a mind in there somewhere. She said, no, we directly encounter them as another person, as another living, expressive center of experience, just like us. It's not a guess, it's a fundamental part of how we experience the world.
For Stein, who would later become a Catholic saint, phenomenology wasn't some kind of replacement for her faith. It was actually the perfect preparation for it. It was this disciplined, philosophical path that revealed the deep reality of what a human person is. And her Catholic faith could then take that insight and light it up even more, with ideas like the soul, grace, and our unique vocation in life. And Karol Wojtyla did something similar. He used phenomenology to build his philosophy of personalism. He described moral choices not as just following some abstract rulebook, but as these lived, real experiences of freedom and responsibility. He showed how love is a concrete thing we live out. And this is so important. He stressed that our body isn't just a machine we drive around, it is absolutely essential to who we are. And this lines up perfectly with the Catholic sacramental worldview, where physical things, bread, wine, water, can actually mediate spiritual grace. Okay, so how can you try this for yourself? How can you actually use this toolkit to re-examine your own world?
Here's a classic example. Pick up a pen and just start writing. As long as it's working, you don't even think about it, right? It's just an extension of your hand. It's a tool you're using. But what happens if the ink suddenly leaks all over the page? Bam! All at once, that pen becomes this very noticeable object of your attention. It's broken, it's separate from you, it's a problem you have to deal with. This tiny little shift shows us that our normal way of being in the world is active and involved, not like a scientist observing things from a distance.
And that really brings us to our final thought here. Phenomenology is basically an invitation to take our own experience seriously, in all its richness and all its meaning. It asks us to just put our theories aside for a moment and simply look. And maybe, just maybe, what if looking carefully at our experience is the very key to understanding what might lie beyond it?